Greetings, friends. This is Phil Amerson again with the Be and Do podcast. It's part of the Belonging Exchange. And we're here with another conversation with my good friend, Bud Herron. Bud has shared in some other podcasts about his work in newspapers, in local media, but also national coverage, international. But I wanted to hear from Bud a little bit about experience that he shared with me going back to his college days at Indiana University. And talk a little bit about your going to college from Hope and people you met there and any lessons that might have been learned there that carry over to how we live our lives today.
Okay. Well, I grew up in a middle-class kind of family in Hope. My dad had come out of poverty. It was a town where you had a division between the haves and have-nots, and that you had the Moravian Church, which had settled it, and all of the people of Germanic descent against all of those who came out of the Depression of the 1870s, like my family. My dad's family were painters, but I hadn't realized until I got to IU and met Pat that even though I considered my family poor, and I did not. And my dad died when I was 16. I had no money to go to school, and worked most of the time I was in school. I hadn't realized really what it was all about until I met Pat Patterson. Pat Patterson was a person who lived across the hall from me in something called the Wilkie Co-op, and that was a place that was there, just a 3-floor small dorm. 2 of them, one for men, one for women, at Wilkie Dormitory in Bloomington. And you got to stay there if you help. You mop the floors, you work in the kitchen, you clean your own room, you take out the trash, you do everything, and you get a real cheap rate. And so a lot of wonderful people were there.
So my memory of IU in those years was that there were places like the Wilkie Co-op, and then there were also the Greek folks that were the other side of the world in terms of economics.
Absolutely. I mean, you had a lot of wealthy folks who on campus, and wearing their signature uniform and their Weegians and all of this stuff. And those of us in Wilkie Co-op were, we were involved in some political issues a bit, and with the war coming on and stuff, so forth. But we played music together. We wrote songs. We were. But Pat Patterson was different than most of the others, who all poor. I know some of them are now doctors, some of them are lawyers, all kinds of stuff from the time I was there. Pat had grown up in Tipton, Indiana, and he lived in what once was a train station. Wasn't a train station anymore. It was fallen down, and his dad, who was a lot older than his mother, he ran a little bicycle repair place in there to try to support the family. Pat had no money, but he was brilliant. He was absolutely brilliant. He majored in IU in Russian and economics. He didn't teach me any Russian, but he taught me a lot of economics. And he was a John Kenneth Galbraith economist in his mind, and who was a liberal economist, and he really influenced me. Well, one day he needed to go home for something, and I was able to borrow a car and drive him up to Tipton to his folks' house. So we get up there to his mom's house. He had 2 brothers living there as well, and when we got there, he kept driving me around town, directing me, showing me stuff, and he wasn't taking me to his house. And
Tipton's not a very big town.
Not very big, and we passed. There's a bar there called the Taiwan On, and we went by that twice, but we didn't stop. And anyway, finally he says to me, "I'm ashamed to tell you this, but I'm embarrassed to take you and show you where I live."
Oh my!
And I just thought, my gosh, it just tore me apart. I said, not realizing at that point, I said, "I'm from Hope, Indiana. You can't scare me." And so we went over there, and it was indeed we stayed there all day, and I spent the night there. And I can remember we had a chicken for dinner that night, and by the time he had 3 brothers and a sister. And the time the plate got to me, there was just a neck left, but I ate the neck, But anyway. Paul, he and I talked often. That's what he grew up in. He came to IU, the Rotary, not the Rotary, the Kiwanis Club up there, gave him a scholarship because he's so brilliant. And he had another scholarship eventually, but he worked at the Boys Club there and for
Bloomington.
extra money in Bloomington. And but one of our most fun, most interesting dialogues was over altruism. He had this belief that altruism is not altruism if you get payment for it, which is pretty true. And he told me this story about when he was a child, and every time Christmas came around, the people would come with the food baskets. And he said he can remember a time when he was in grade school, peeking through the window on Christmas morning to see a green station wagon, he even remembered the color of it, pull up in front of his house, and a man and woman in all dressed up for church got out and holding the hand of their little daughter who was in school with him and bringing a food basket up to his door. And he said, I was mortified that someone in my class in school would be bringing to my house a free food basket because we were poor. Mm-hmm. And he said, and I said to myself at that point in words that now ring differently when I say them, but the intent was there, is that is not altruism. That's maybe good. But he said, these people didn't know us. And Pat's theory was, you only give personally to people you are personal with. And if you are not in relationship with the person you're trying to give something to, then it's not a gift because you're getting paid back for it by being able to hold up how wonderful person you are and feel good about yourself because you gave something that was pretty cheap for you to give.
So altruism is not altruism if you get paid for it.
That's what he said.
And the payment that many look for is patting themselves on the back for doing something.
Absolutely. And he says that's abuse. He said, and if you bring children into it, and I don't know if he thought of Sally Struthers, but I did, going online, showing pictures of starving children, promising a letter from them and a picture and to people so that they can get emotional satisfaction out of sending some money to some organization.
And right now in the state of Indiana and across the country, we're struggling with this at a pretty profound level. Medicaid cuts, for instance. And I began to see it as politicians would talk about the able-bodied deserve it. And if you look beneath the statistics, what you see is 75, 80% of the people who are receiving Medicaid are already working.
Right. Absolutely.
And so for the state legislature now in our state and nationally, the Congress to say, well, we're only going to give this to the able-bodied is just one more way to say the poor will keep over there and we'll take our tax breaks in the meantime.
Exactly right, Phil. And add another dimension to this is in giving to, church giving. And giving, so people ask me, if you don't give the things that are personal, that you see the person receive it and smile at you and thank you, then how do you give? I said, well, you have connections with agencies like UMCOR and other things in the Methodist Church and other churches where you believe in the validity of this and that your money is being taken care of and the church in general. That's one place you can do it is if you trust your church, you don't ask them to earmark everything that they give for us
to put your name on the food basket.
Don't put your name on the food basket, and you give that way. But what you've got to do is believe in those institutions.
Yeah.
And people are so skeptical today with everything that's being lied to. But Pat taught me a lot about it, and I try to do my best. Sometimes I probably fall short, but it's important.
So what happened to Pat after that?
Well, Pat became the redevelopment director for the city of Bloomington and helped redevelop the Pigeon Hill area that was a huge slum out of west of town. And he was great at that because he had such empathy for the people there.
Right.
And he went there and got to know the people there, that some of them being moved and some of them, when you move somebody, it's not always improved, even if the house is better.
Right. Let's put a flag in that. He was good at it because he knew the people.
He knew the people, and he was there. And Pat, unfortunately, I came back from Texas and met him down at Nick's one day just to reminisce. And he had gotten married and had 2 kids, and he was in his mid-30s. Went fishing with one of his kids and threw a line out. And when he threw the line out, he fell forward with a heart attack, and he died. But before that happened, and I don't know if I told you this, 2 of his brothers he was able to help through IU.
Look at
himself. And he helped both of his brothers through there. And he brought his mother down. They lived in a rental house out on a 10th Street in one of those old houses. And
so that's what we mean by the belonging exchange. Is you may think you're just helping one individual, especially if you get to know them. But there's a ripple effect that goes out. We had a podcast recently where I talked about my friend in Panama who came to college here, and I was so concerned that I wanted him to go back and not be a part of the brain drain, and he was great. He looked at me and said, "You take care of Phil, and I'll take care of Clarence." And it took 40 years.
Yeah.
When we visited, and I still remember up in his old hometown in Bocas del Toro in Panama, he would introduce this nephew and that niece and that cousin, all of whom he had helped go to college. And those are the ripple effects that community allows when people belong to one another.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Bud Herron. This is Phil Amerson, The Belonging Exchange. Look us up. Ask others to tune in and read the blog. Thanks.